Hey everyone. All right, we're live. Welcome to this live episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today as a guest we have Mr. Anglo-Acadian, Anglocolon, but he goes by Anglo. How are you doing, Anglo?
Doing great. Thank you for having me here.
No, thank you very much for coming on. We're going to have a jam-packed episode today. To get things started, can you give the audience just a brief background on who you are?
Well, I'm a concerned Canadian, multi-generational Canadian, uh, settler stock Canadian, and what I'd like to do today is try to elucidate some information to people. Now, I don't know exactly who your audience is, but I imagine they are mainly concerned Canadians who are tired of the continued betrayals from the Conservative Party, the establishment parties, I should say, both of them, and they want a better understanding of how we can secure our own destiny within Canada, build our nation, and deal with some of the issues that are currently not acceptable within mainstream discourse.
No, that's a brilliant introduction, and you're spot on. I'm pretty sure that's an accurate description of my audience. Before getting started, two words of caution for people listening in. One, this is going to be more of a structured episode, so if you see me looking off screen, basically we're going off a bunch of questions because there's a lot of content to cover, and we want to keep it structured. The second thing, in the event that Anglo kind of not necessarily goes off script, but goes into too much detail, I might jump in and interrupt them. I hope you guys don't take offense to that. I don't like interrupting my guests. So to start the episode, Anglo, the first we're going to be talking about Zionism. And this is something people have asked me. They're like, what's your view on Zionism? And I just don't know what it is. So could you start by giving us a definition of what Zionism is?
In its simplest terms, Zionism is Jewish nationalism. And today I'd like to explain what that pertains to the issue of Canada, international Zionism, and why it's so important to our political discourse. Because I understand for a lot of people, they've been either, depending on the generations or even all generations, they've been raised on television and traditional forms of media that have over the years tried to present a more neutral take on Zionism. And what I'd like to do today is talk again about how Zionism impacts our domestic policy and our foreign policy. So when I say that Zionism is Jewish nationalism, understand that the people who view themselves as Zionists, well, there are two types. There are actual Jewish Zionists. Now, there is a spectrum of types of Zionism. There's left wing Zionism, there's religious right wing Zionism. Now, these can have different specific views, but what they tend to do is put the interests of the state of Israel and the Jewish people above the current state that they live in. And this is going to be controversial when we discuss the IRHA definition later, but what the idea of Zionism was originally by its founder and political founder, Theodor Herzl, was the idea that Jews as a people can never be viewed as part of the nation that they belong in. And this was pertaining to Europe, where they were living amongst French and English and Germans and Austrians and various other nations. And there had been for centuries or millennia distinctions between the peoples living in these territories, these principalities, and later nation states, where eventually the nation state encouraged and allowed assimilation into the national identity. And this caused other problems because previously there had been limitations on citizenship, handicaps, or disabilities, I should say, in terms of attaining full citizenship. What later assimilationist policies encouraged to do was to make Jews into the part of the nations that they belong to, which encouraged assimilation. And this is probably even more considered by Herzl and other revisionist Zionists as being more dangerous than violent anti-Semitism, because assimilation will mean that Jews will eventually assimilate into the population, and when they assimilate fully, there will be no more Jewish community. So, how does this pertain to Canada? Well, in Canada, we never had restrictions on Jewish people. Well, since the country was founded, Jews were always considered citizens of the country. They were considered settlers, co-settlers, right? And the idea of Zionism started in the later half of the 19th century. And when it came to Canada, there were already established Jewish communities here, and a lot of them were actually arriving in mass numbers due to efforts from very rich Jewish backers in Europe, bankers such as Maurice Hirsch and the Rothschilds, to encourage settlements in Canada, also in the same time Argentina and the US. But when they came to Canada, Zionism didn't develop as an idea of separating from Canada till later. Now, I think we should maybe pause that and move on to your next question before I get too specific.
Sure. So the next one, I think, how is this related to? There's two questions. How is this related to Israel, and what is the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs?
Okay, so this works perfectly. So we have the CIJA, which is the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. So the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs used to be a separate group, and it was the Canadian Council for Israel and Jewish Advocacy. All right, it was ran by a guy named Shimon Fogel. Okay, right, and he is he's a registered consultant with Canadian Affairs, right, Canadian Foreign Affairs, and he worked on the Canada Israel Committee. Now that was an actual lobbying group, a foreign lobbying group, right, that advocated was the advocacy group for the Jewish Federation of Canada, right? So you have the Jewish Federation of Canada, the JFC, and the United Israel Appeal, UIA, right, working with the Jewish Agency, and this is how it ties in with Israel. So you have the Jewish Agency, which is the largest Jewish charity group, right? It's based in Israel. Currently, the president of Israel, not the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but President Herzog, okay, he was the head of the Jewish Agency. Now, what the Jewish Agency does is it encourages and works with Jewish communities across the world to immigrate back to Israel, okay? And the JA receives money from well, I shouldn't say foreign communities, but it receives it from the diaspora communities, and it receives the majority of its funding from the Jewish Federations of North America, which makes up the American and Jewish communities, right? Where they send somewhere close to $400 million per year to the JNF. Oh, sorry, to the JA. And I know I just said it, and we're going to talk about this later. But what the JA does is it works with another proto group, the Jewish National Fund, right? So the Jewish Agency works with the JNF, which works with the Israeli government to take Jewish people from around the world and settle them in Israel directly or in the territories, in the settlements. And this ties in with some of the issues that we're going to bring up later, where CIJA previously was its own group from the early 20s, and its previous president, well, you had the Canadian Jewish Congress. That predated the CIJA by decades. It started in the early 20th century. It predated the mandate of Israel and Palestine, and its previous presidents included Samuel Brofman of the Brofman family, Erwin Kotler, our former Attorney General for Canada, and its last president was Mark Freeman, who was the previous Attorney General for Canada and head of Indigenous Affairs, and his last CEO was Bernie Farber. Now, Bernie Farber is the founder of Canada Anti-Hate Network, and we're going to talk about them later, right? But to tie back what CIJ is, right, it connects the issues facing the Jewish community, and it acts as the official body of the Jewish community and the lobbying efforts for Israel. Now, there are other groups, but CIJA acts as an umbrella group. And the problem is when CIJA is working with Jewish federations in North America to the Jewish Agency to JNF. They're taking money and people and transplanting them from one country to another. And the problem is, well, whose loyalty do they work under? Which comes to our issue of the IRHA definition, which CIJA and other groups have been pushing very hard. So maybe we
So
should, yeah.
no, I have some questions. There's a lot in there. So
Yes.
is Zionism, is that like Christendom? If I'm pronouncing it right?
In a way, it does. It is, well, there's a religious aspect to it, but there's also a secular aspect to it, and sometimes they overlap now. Well, I shouldn't say sometimes. A lot of the time, they overlap now. Where in many of the Western countries, well, I shouldn't just say. Well, yeah, historically, Zionism was viewed as and is viewed as a heresy by Orthodox Jewish communities to a certain extent. But there's a kind of give and take here, where Zionism, as the idea of the Jewish people returning to the Holy Land, to is Haretz Israel, right? Where they are not supposed to. They are supposed to be a wandering people until the Messiah, the Moshiach, returns. Right? They are forbidden from doing that. So many of the ultra religious groups tend to dismiss Zionism, but by and large, the Jewish groups in Canada, and when I say Jewish groups, I mean as in official groups representing synagogues and religious groups, well, they believe that Zionism is a legitimate aspect of Judaism. So they believe that the land of Israel and the Jewish people are inseparable. So
Well, my next question would be, what about the Muslim Brotherhood? Is that like the Muslim counterpart of Zionism, or are they actually terrorists?
the Muslim Brotherhood is strictly speaking like an Egyptian religious group. They are a religious national group, but they I would not. Wait, are you suggesting the CIJA and the Muslim Brotherhood are comparable?
No, I'm just trying to, for ordinary people that don't really understand what Zionism is, I'm asking, are they basically teams? They're playing the same game, but they're just different teams.
Not really. And the difference is like between Zionism basically teaches that Jews can't be citizens of the countries that they live in, except for the Jewish state. But when it comes to Jewish groups living abroad, that doesn't really work out. And this is why you have the IRHA definition, which is self-contradictory. Where, and if we just pull it up, right, where the IRHA says that it is anti-Semitic to accuse Jewish people of having dual loyalty or single loyalty to a foreign state of Israel over their nation state. But at the same time, modern Jewish groups like CIJA say that the state of Israel is inseparable from the Jewish people, and vice versa. Where if you say that, well, someone like Shimon Fogel is loyal to the state of Israel, that would be classified as being anti-Semitic.
Right. Can you break that down again?
So let's say that you have people that are Jewish. They're born in Canada. They've been here for 3, 4, 5 plus generations. Okay, right? They are Canadian. Okay. Right now, our laws with the RHA say that okay, well, we are going to criticize Israel. We're going to say that Israel is a racist settler state. Okay, the same way that that terminology is used in Canada, right? We're going to say, well, Canada is a racist colonial settler state. Okay, that's the official policy of Canada. That's in all of our schools, and that's part of this decolonization program. I know we're going to talk about this later, but so we say that about Canada. That's all well and good. But if you say that Israel is a racist colonial settler state, Jewish groups can say, well, I take offense to that because it's part of my religious beliefs. But again, if you're saying, well, okay, aren't you Canadian? Why should you care more about a foreign country being called a racist settler state and not the one that you live in, right? Again, you can never have, you could theoretically have been here for 4+ generations, never have gone to Israel, but you can take offense on its behalf.
No, I hear what you're saying. The reason I have this like does not compute look on my face is, couldn't you paint all immigrants sort of with the same brush? Couldn't you? This is why I asked about Christendom. Couldn't you paint religious institutions that they're sort of saying you belong to God or Christ more so than your nation?
Well, it's vastly different, and it doesn't really compare. And the reason why it doesn't quite compare, like if you're gonna say like take the old know nothings or the anti Catholic sentiment, right, where Catholics are, they have allegiance, they have fealty to the Vatican and the Pope. Um, you're allowed to criticize the Catholic Church. You're allowed to criticize the Pope. You're allowed to criticize Catholicism till every day in Canada, right? We do it all the time, okay? But you're not allowed to do that for Israel or Judaism or the relationship between Zionism and the Jewish beliefs tied to it. And there is no Christian states that people swear allegiance to, and they demand that our politicians go visit and like bow their heads at. And we'll probably tie that in later when we're talking about the political parties and how they've been captured by this ideology, right? It's really not comparable. That's what I will say.
Okay. Well, let's leave that. I have a feeling we're going to come back to it. So the next question I had was October 7th. What is your, and again, any views are welcome on the show, whatever you believe. What's your view on why that happened, what the purpose was, which side you support, how you view it? Go ahead.
October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. Now, again, previously I said you have CIJA, it's working with the Jewish Agency, which is working with JNF, right? And from its inception, right, both the Jewish Agency and the JNF have worked to acquire land in Palestine, right? And working with the Israeli government, forcibly removing people from villages and territories, right? This has been the process for nigh 100 years. And so much in the past, you've run up into issues of resistance from the native population. And if I could quote the founder of revisionist Zionism, Jeff Jabotinsky, and he writes explicitly in his paper, The Iron Wall, about how all native groups resist colonization. Okay, so what happened on October 7th was that decades of successful lobbying in America resulted in the creation of the Abraham Peace Accords, which under Donald Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, successfully was bringing the Arab Gulf states and Saudi Arabia to the negotiation table, right, to hammer out an acknowledgement of the state of Israel. Now, um, again, when you brought up the Muslim Brotherhood and other Muslim groups do not recognize the state of Israel. They view it as an illegitimate takeover of Muslim lands, which it was. They view the native Palestinian, Muslim, and Christian communities as being uh, taken over by this foreign group, this foreign ideology that is it goes against their belief system. But the problem is between the Gulf states and the Saudis, they worked out a process over the years where they would begin to acknowledge Israel, and the nail in the coffin. Well, the fear was that if the Saudi monarchy and the Gulf states formally recognize Israel, that would be tantamount to the end of hoping that these more powerful Arab states, these more wealthy Arab states, would put out resistance on behalf of Palestinians. Because while Israel exists today, um, and this is again the goal of the Zionist lobby is to get these remaining Muslim states to recognize them. They, at the same time, do not recognize a Palestinian state, nor have they ever recognized one. They do not believe in one. And this, again, is the policy of CIJA and the World Zionist Organization. These groups do not want a Palestinian state to exist. And October 7th was an attempt at drawing, again, attention to the conflict. And it involved taking hostages. And the events that day, the attack on that concert, right? There's a lot of fake news about that event that we've been dealing with for months now. Uh, there's a lot of atrocity propaganda tied in with the events of the day of October 7th, where we've heard repeatedly by Canadian officials where they talked about beheaded babies, mass rapes, things that did not happen. But we are told that we have to accept that that did happen, or when it's beyond a doubt proven that they did not happen, they just move on to another uh, fabrication of something that happened on that day. And what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
No, you answered that question. I have some follow-up questions, but um, I mean, I have to say this, otherwise I'm going to get crucified. They did kill upwards of 1,300 people, correct?
Here's the thing. So there was the attack on that music concert and the nearby settlements, right? The kibbutzim, right? But and this is where the real controversy comes up, both in Israel and abroad, where when the and this is like part of the larger issue, right? The Israeli state has one of the most sophisticated intelligence apparatuses, right? They they have a massive security perimeter around the Gaza Strip. They have they, they monitor communications in and out. They knew, like, and this is something that is barely even controversial to say anymore. They likely knew that October 7th was going to happen. How long in advance, I can't say, but they knew it was going to happen, right? Um, and the response that day was first slow and more controversy. And again, is that the footage that was being broadcasted for weeks and months after October 7th showed burned out cars, blown up houses. Now, the Hamas gunmen, or whatever you wanted to call them, they went out and they shot up places with AK-47s. You do not blow up cars and houses with AK-47s. And as been shown by various Israeli news outlets, the Israeli Air Force, in the form of helicopters, were exchanging fire at the concert that took place, using much larger munitions that would tend to blow up vehicles a lot easier than AK-47s. And also at the same time, when the Israeli ground forces responded outside the Gaza Strip, they were using tanks again. And you've had stories that were brought up where one of the more disturbing ones was that they kept on bringing up a family where it was, I believe it was young twin girls that were buried weeks after the event, and they had been blown up. So were they blown up by Hamas gunmen with AK-47s, or was it because of tank fire that was being fired by the Israeli forces? This is the issue that we're dealing with. And there has also come out now reports about the fact that when hostages were being taken to Gaza, so for years, the Israelis have had issues where hostages, both IDF units and civilians, have been taken as hostages, and they've been exchanged for dozens, if not hundreds, of Palestinian detainees that are locked up in Israeli prisons. So you have the Hannibal Directive, where the idea is hostages can be killed by friendly fire if it prevents later collateral by allowing uh, Palestinian prisoners to be freed, if that makes sense.
No,
So
yeah, don't let them take hostages, is what you're saying.
exactly, and the number of hostages taken into Gaza, what it started off as 200 plus hostages from the nearby settlements, and then like the nearby concert. And again, this week we've heard continuously, and this is the thing where we're hearing from the highest Canadian officials down to the lower levels, talking about like the 6 hostages that have been killed. This has become a mainstay focus where we're hearing about people that were Israelis, but at the same time they were also dual citizens. A lot of these for months now, we've been hearing about the number of Israeli hostages, but also the excuses that, Western governments need to intervene because there have been Canadian hostages, Australian hostages, British hostages, American hostages, and these are people that maybe were born abroad but chose to become Israeli citizens. Okay, which is another problem that we're dealing with, where these people who identify somewhat as the countries that they live in choose to move to Israel. And the young man that they're talking the most about, Mr. Golden Poland, I believe, right? Again, left America when he was 7, joined the IDF, and at 23 years old, he was a starch Israeli citizen, served in the Israeli military forces. He's kidnapped, and they're treating it like he was an American kidnapped off the street. These are people who chose to move to a hostile zone, a war zone, right? Having
Well,
settlements outside the yeah, sorry,
no, I was going to say let's leave October 7th.
yeah, I think we've
Uh,
talked enough about it.
yeah. And again, if somebody is watching, if they've had a victim from that conflict, either side, apologies if anyone's feelings got hurt, either side, Israeli, Palestinian. There we have an audience member, Prairie. She says hello. So hey, Prairie, how's it going? Anglo, my next question would be: you alluded to the tanks and basically the slow response from the IDF. I heard rumors that one of the reasons was because of the protests surrounding the judicial reforms. Uh, my view, I always thought that the judicial reforms were necessary to get away from a leftist court. What are your views on Netanyahu's judicial reforms?
The important thing to take away from the court reforms is that they are not actually an Israeli idea. It's largely a consequence of the diaspora. So this is a problem between Zionism you have in Israel and abroad, where you have diaspora Zionists who take a personal heed on to the affairs of Israel. So you have guys, specifically Roger Hertog, who is a wealthy billionaire who sponsored the Tikva Fund, and again, he's a major donor to various Jewish causes, including the ADL. Right, where under him they created the Shalem Institute, and they're working right now to they're trying to create a model where in the U.S. you have the Federalist Society, which is a think tank that preps. They get candidates that are aligned politically, and you get judges who elevate young people to the court, and eventually those people will become judges. So Israel did not have a liberal college system. It did not have, I shouldn't say a liberal college system, but they were creating a new school in Israel, which would basically be a means to get neoconservative, well, not neoconservative, but national conservative think tank, well, national conservative school of thought in Israel, the same way that it operates and basically has control over which conservative judges or candidates get to become judges first in America, and they wanted to transplant that model into Israel. So if it means that they're challenging Israel's unions, if they're challenging, human rights groups in Israel, if they're challenging anyone there, you want to have people that are aligned with you politically, and that's the tune of, ironically, foreign backers, not actual Israelis.
Okay, no, I didn't know that. Um, Thank you. So another question I would have is, as a Canadian, like I'm looking at this. Well, I immigrated here, but as a Canadian citizen, um, like there's a war going on in the Middle East. You have quote unquote Zionists influencing public policy, and then you have pro-Palestinian protesters on the streets. To the average Canadian, why should they even care about any of this? If that
Well,
makes sense.
yeah, that's a sane question to ask. But to the Canadians, you would ask, well, what is it of my concern? Well, you simply have to look at both the leading parties right now. You can look at the Liberals, and you can look at the Conservatives, the Tories, and you see, if you just begin to scratch, you start seeing the marks of foreign lobbying that have taken over the course of decades. Right now, in Canada, under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, right, you had the abandonment of the bicultural state in Canada, moving to the multicultural state in Canada, and Trudeau Sr. was backed by the Bronfman brothers, right? You had Charles and Edgar Bronfman. Charles is still alive, and his son is Stephen Bronfman, who runs the Liberal Party's finances. And Edgar, who was the previous head of the World Jewish Congress, right? And the impact that that has on where, well, Canada is no longer going to be bicultural. We're not going to be like Anglo French anymore. We're going to be multicultural. Okay, that's something we can attribute to Trudeau, and at the same time, strong supporter of Israel, very strong supporter of Israel and the Jewish project there, and various pro-Zionist groups within Canada. And again, under his son Justin Trudeau, who has said that Canada is moving towards a post-nation state. Everyone is always bringing that up, right? Canada is a new, right? We're no longer a nation state anymore. This is Trudeau's thing, and many, I imagine, your audience is very well aware of that, very concerned. But what they might not be aware of, and this again came out in 2024, right? While there was all these protests going on, and there's dissent within the Liberal Party and within the NDP, where people are critical of Zionism. And Justin Trudeau comes out and he says, Zionism is not a dirty word. So that's a head scratcher. Okay. Well, the prime minister of our country is pro-Zionist. You know, he's pro-Jewish nationalism, but he's not pro-Canadian nationalism. Okay. Well, what about the opposition? Well, you have Pierre Poilievre, right, and Poilievre, PP, right, and do I have to go over all the details where he's talking about how much he loves Israel or the other members of his party? Or case in point, right? As much as PP is in favor of pro migration, he is very much a staunch supporter of Israel and Zionism, and he is extremely hostile to groups that are viewed as opponents of Zionism. And under PP, you have the two deputy leaders of the Conservative Party, Tim Uppal, a Sikh, right, and Melissa Landsman. Now, with those two people, very interesting, right? And people might say, well, what does that have to do with things? Well, Melissa Landsman is a Jewish Zionist lesbian. And before people say, well, what does that have to do with things? Well, the Conservative Party doesn't have a strong anti-DEI, and we're going to probably get into that later. But when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, right, there's this timid response to the impact that this has on it. PP barely talks about it. He doesn't explicitly condemn it as being anti-Canadian. It doesn't go after Canadians. But Melissa Landsman has explicitly gone after DEI. And she did this in an interview, right, where she described the problem with DEI is that it's anti-Jewish. Okay, and again, she's networked with CIJA and various other Zionist groups within Canada. And then you have Tim Uppal, right, who is a Sikh, but, and this is the interesting thing, well, at the same time in Canada right now, we have this kind of this open season from both parties against the threat of a Sikh cabal, a Sikh mafia that's operating within Canada, a pro-Khalistani group, right? Tim Uppal in 2014, he went over to Israel. He put his hand on the Wailing Wall, took a photo of it, which is a atypical sign of submission to a foreign state. Right, you can see many Western officials travel to Israel, and a sign of fealty is them going up to the Wailing Wall and putting their hand on it. And then Tim Upal, again in 2014, he's meeting up with then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Actually, I had to double check if he was prime minister at the time. I believe he was. But again, he's meeting up with Bibi Netanyahu. So both deputy leaders of the Conservative Party are strongly aligned with the interests of a foreign country, and that foreign country happens to be Israel. Well, I'd ask for an explanation from various CPC officials, but they're very slow to condemn, and when they want to address it, there are typical responses to turn it around on you and condemn you. And again, I just want to flip back to the liberals, right, where you have, again, in the Labor Party, oh sorry, the liberals, you have guys like Marco Mendicino, who is our former safety minister, right? And I'm sure many people in your audience, right, might recall that Marco was the reason behind Canada's handgun ban and our other gun ban, right? That was under him. Now, again, talking about public safety, right? Marco made up this whole, well, we have to be highly concerned about like assault style weapons. Well, it's very ironic that when the gun ban became enforced in Canada, when it went after semi-automatic rifles and rifles with magazines. One of the big exceptions to this was the Israeli Tavor rifle, which you can still get in Canada. So a battle rifle of the Israeli military is easily acquired in Canada, where you can no longer get a number of other older types of semi-automatic rifles, or even handguns. But for some reason, Israeli arms are still allowed to be imported and sold to the public. And when it comes to Marco, again, this is a guy who is a former minister for refugees and immigrants and all. He is very much concerned about anti-Semitism. He's very much concerned about anti-Zionism. And right now, if you go on see Doug Ford's nephew, he's the Minister of Culture. Again, they're all very concerned about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We're in Ontario right now. They're going after Fred Hahn, who is this flaming gay guy who is the head of like the Ontario Laborers Union, right? The COOP, right? They're going after him because, right, they're supporting the Palestinians, which is completely unacceptable in the eyes
Let me
of the
stop you
Zionist
there.
groups. Yeah. Okay. Please.
That's where I wanted to go. So before going there, I wanted to realign the conversation. You mentioned biculturalism. I want to come back to that, specifically Diefenbaker and the Ukrainian lobby. And you also mentioned lobbyists. Hopefully, we'll get to those. But right now, can you tie in? You called it the civil war that's going on with the BC Anti-Racism Act, and sort of the Jewish on one side and the Palestinian on the other, and they're fighting over the scraps. In my words.
Well, it's not even they're fighting over the scraps, and I'm glad we are taking this to the BC Anti-Racism Act, which is something that desperately needs to be brought up in more discussions in Canada. So the BC Anti-Racism Act, which is now enforced, right, is going to come up with an anti-racism council. Now, the goal of this bill was to go after systemic racism against Indigenous people and racialized communities in Canada. And it's going to form up an anti-racism council and an anti-racism, um, not monitor, but they're going to have an annual checkup on this, right? And the council is going to be made up of various members of racialized communities and people who are, for lack of a better term, woke graduates, people who have degrees in critical thinking, diversity, equity, inclusion, people who specialize in this, okay? And how it ties in with the Jewish lobby, well, there I go, right? But it ties in with the fact that it was backed by CIJA. So CIJA supported and backed this new anti-racism act, and the reason why it has a negative impact is that it affects hiring and retention in public sector and other sectors of BC's hiring. Okay, they're saying now that, well, it has to reflect more of the population. It has to do more to increase equity, right? And this is shorthand for saying that if you are white, male, Christian, if your family's been in the country for X amount of generations, you're going to get passed over. You're going to be discriminated against because of this act, okay? And the Conservative Party has not so much as whispered about it. They have not challenged it. They have made no appeal to challenge it, okay? CIJ has, and the reason why that's so ironic is that if this policy was even slightly discriminatory against people who might identify as being Jewish, they would be decrying it. Now, the other major important fact when it comes to this new act is it's going to give grants to groups addressing discrimination and racism. Now, CIAJ, when it, you know, bragged that the act had been passed, they brought up the fact that hate crime, anti-Semitic hate crime, was skyrocketing in Vancouver since October 7th, right? And their main concern is universities right now, where you have UBC and other colleges that were hosting pro-Palestinian events, and where they criticize Zionism. CIJA says, well, you're basically going after Jewish people. And they're insisting that, well, this new act will allow them to receive grants to go after groups, go after universities, basically give them money to sue these institutions in order to get them to change their policies. And at the same time, why I find it super ironic is that uh, people might not understand, right? Well, why should we care about like leftists who back Palestinians or Palestinian activists or Muslim activists, right? So in Ontario, in Toronto, you have the Toronto District School Board, which is the largest school board in Canada. We here in Ontario have, this is where the base of CIJ is. They decided that um, they're going to recognize anti-Palestinian racism in the school district. Okay, who was the first to come out in opposition to this? Well, it was CIJA. So CIJA, which is nominally opposing all systemic, racism, came out and said that they will do all they can to oppose recognizing anti-Palestinian racism, saying that the definition was too broad and it took away Jewish people's ability to identify as being indigenous to Israel. So this all becomes a war of who gets to define indigeneity and who gets to use the term indigenous, right? Between the Palestinians and the Jewish community and even indigenous peoples in Canada, right? There's this constant tug and pull about who gets to call the other the settler, the colonist, because settler and colonist, in addition to being pejoratives, are having extremely negative connotations, is something that we in Canada are trying to actively combat, nominally in certain ways, right? And when it comes to the issue of Israel and Palestine, right, where Palestinians call Israelis settlers, colonizers, the Jews say, well, actually, the Arabs are the colonizers and the settlers, and Palestinians are just Arab settlers. So who gets to call the other that in Canada? This is where it comes down to, again, foreign ethnic lobbies and various other types of lobbies that might back one or the other. But say you have the teachers union decide, well, we're going to recognize anti-Palestinian racism. Okay, well, that's fine. But the next lobby above the teachers union and the Toronto District School Board would be Ontario's education minister, who, again, is a very strong supporter of Israel. And when CIJA and the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center come out and they say, well, we want a new bill that's going to force teachers, not students, teachers to take mandatory anti-Semitism training. What type of training do you think that's going to include? Well, it's going to include having to recognize the RHA definition of anti-Semitism, which I think we might have touched on a bit, but the RHA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, again says that if you call Israel a racist, a settler state, that is anti Semitism. So calling Zionism a settler ideology, or saying that Israelis are settlers, or that even just saying or Palestinians are being colonized, is a form of anti Semitism. So again,
Um,
yeah.
let me jump in. First of all, it seems like you have a fan. I'm loving this guest. Very informative. So maybe give Prairie a follow. Oh, it's on YouTube. Um, the next thing, like I'm looking at this and it's absolute chaos. Like this is a case of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you have like the CIJA and the on one side and the pro-Palestinian, unions on the other side. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this again. This goes back to the question about ordinary Canadians. Like, shouldn't we have freedom of speech and freedom of conscience? If somebody wants to be racist, that's the government has no right to intervene. Am I being naive there?
Well, you're right in that the sense that both groups, you could say, have hostility and animus, a bigotry towards the other, but that bigotry is protected by people that they are able to pay off, people who work on their behalf in the government. And when again, just coming to the Anti-Racism Act in BC, there's nothing that says it couldn't be similarly adopted in any of the other provinces. And there is nobody speaking on behalf of just what it is: white Canadians, white settler descendant Canadians, who are going to be passed over for this. And that form of discrimination is not only tolerated, it's fully welcomed. So um, I'm a little past the naivete where it's like, okay, this is it's all a bit of a it's a never ending struggle for this, right? We have to have people who are lobbying on our behalf against these other groups that are acting against
I
us.
If I can pick up on what you said it's a never-ending struggle. I believe there's a quote in the Bible that says a house divided cannot stand. So I'm trying to wonder if going back to Diefenbaker and the Ukrainian lobby, so those guys, they kind of set the seeds for eroding the concept of biculturalism in Canada, and then it ushered in multiculturalism.
Yeah, I
Now we're
blame the
paying.
Ukrainians a lot for this. I know, but we're again that's a bit of a tongue in cheek joke, but again, it's
Yeah.
something where I can say, hey, if it wasn't for these Ukrainians, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation, right? And I say that again when I see,
Right, but
yeah,
what I'm saying is now we've brought in 1.25 millions in immigrants. 450,000 of them are permanent residents in 2023. The population of East Indians, not to pick on East Indians in particular, they just have to be a big population. There, are we going to see? Is history just going to repeat, and they're going to be the new Ukrainians of the 60s?
oh, of course, we're already seeing this, and this is where we start to see these interlocking lobbies, where the CIJA backs uh, the coalition of. Hold on, I have. It's they're basically working with their counterpart, the North American Hindu lobby, right, where they want to raise a awareness about the situation in Bangladesh and say that, well, Hindus are being persecuted here and they're being discriminated against here, and we have to have new definitions of Hindu phobia, right? And that model, that definition of Hindu phobia, they're modeling on the IRHA definition explicitly. And just for reference, Toronto used to be an Anglo city. It used to be a majority Anglo city, and then the largest uh, population after that was the Jewish population, and it's no longer that. And as these new populations come in, and as they're put in different major cities, they're going to be self-identifying with that community, lobbying on behalf of that community, and engaging with communities that they might have issues back home with. And you brought up the East Indians. Now, that's India is a large country, 1.2, well, over a billion people, and the types of Indians that we're getting over here, um, a lot of them are Punjabi Sikhs, and as you know, right now the discourse has followed in Canada for months about our emergency minister, our former defense minister, who, again, he's a Sikh, and he was being accused of being biased towards Sikhs in Afghanistan. And it was very rich at the time because this was coming from Globe and Mail and other mainstream liberal news outlets where they're so ready to talk about the impact in places like Surrey and Toronto when it comes, or Alberta, when it comes to like this up and coming Sikh lobby, the Khalistani lobby, as some might call it, and the people who are most vocal about it are people who are aligned with the Zionist movement. And that's because the Zionists and Hindu lobbies have both aligned on who to work against, right? And working in tandem against both the pro-Palestine independence movement and the Palestinian independence movement.
Where I'm kind of leading you to water, but where I'm trying to get to is like, how do we maybe not permanently fix this, but like, how do we simplify it a little bit? Like, to me, solution would be nationalism. And I'm just using that in the sense that you're proud of your country. You have certain values and you support those values. And one of those would be, if there's a war going on thousands of miles away, I don't care about it, or at least I don't want to get involved.
I mean, yes, 100%. And, I've grown over the years where in previous years I never understood, or I was against the idea that, well, Quebec nationalism meant that Quebec, voted against entering into both world wars. But, you know, over the years, doing more research into both, that is just an example of the fact that Quebec, which is a place that has a strong sense of identity, that even said, well, okay, France is invaded, not our problem. Okay. Um, and there's a lesson from that. And for decades, right, there was a hostility back and forth between Anglo Canada and Quebec on issues like that. And I can't really endorse, the Canadian identity going forward, which is going to say, well, we're a multicultural state. We take issue with everyone everywhere, where we're going to have so many divided loyalties. I mean, it was easy enough when we were simply a colony, and then we were a member of the Commonwealth, and we had a single allegiance to a crown over on a small island, in Europe. But we're removing ourselves away from that history, and we're going to be moving into a more sectarian, divided history, and that will be the future. We're going to have different groups that are competing for shrinking resources. And uh, just to kind of bring it back to the issue of CIJ, and I know later on we're going to talk about like the whole native issue versus settler issue, but I read this interesting introduction, and it was by a professor at York University, and it was discussing Jewish native relations, and the professor, puts out the idea, well, in Canada, on the census, they want as many Jews to be people to self-identify as being Jewish because it means more resources and attention are allotted to that community. But on the opposing side, on the Métis side, it's actually the opposite, where if more people identify as being Native or Métis, it means that there's less resources to go around between these different communities. And self-identification, how you choose to identify. So if again you choose to identify as this minority group, you're going to get more attention from the government. If you choose to identify as Canadian, you're not going to get any advantage of that. And perfect case of this is that I know I wanted to talk about the Canada Race Relations Foundation, but just to make it relevant, right? We just had Arif Virani, right, our migrant and refugee minister, come out not 2 days ago, right, saying that they're celebrating the International Day for People of African Descent, celebrating the incredible contributions of Black people worldwide. We underscore our commitment on eliminating systemic racism and discrimination for all Canadians of African descent. And this is part of a new initiative by the Canadian government, the Canada's Black Justice Strategy. And this is to combat what is being classified as anti-Black racism and discrimination. And again, this is like aimed at hiring. It's aimed at this is a form of lobbying that's saying that, well, you're a part of this minority group in Canada. We're going to give you all this special attention, and we're going to work it so that, well, you can complain about Canadians, and we will change the law to reflect that. And there's a great irony in this, that Arif Irani is a refugee. He's a refugee, so he's an Asian Muslim, right? He's this Mali, and he's from Uganda. He's from Uganda. He was from a country where the Asian Muslim, well, the Indian population, including the Muslim population, were kicked under Idi Amin, because Idi Amin had a black he had a black empowerment policy for the country of Uganda. Okay, right? Arif and his family fled to Canada. Now, all right, when you look under his ministry, did they talk openly about praising various ethnic groups in Canada, be it Black, Asian, etc.? Not a single word of positivity aimed towards white Canadians. Okay, and this is just an example of this, where now we have this new group that's going to be operating with the Canada Race Relations Foundation, right? This is the this new Black African Initiative program, right? They're going to be working with a group that is a crown corporation that gets to tell the Canadian government on how it should deal with race relations, handle discrimination, handle anti-racism, and it gets to define it, right? Because you have networks working with these groups to say, well, we feel such and such about like this policy, or we feel like we're not getting hired enough, so we want change. And there is no counterweight on that, right? If you go under the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, you go to their boards, there is nobody who self-identifies as being white Canadian. There is Susan Rosenberg, who spent 2 decades at the Bronfman Family Foundation, who is a Zionist, right? And so Zionists have they have two representatives actually on the Canada Race Relations Foundation. So all racial discourse in Canada is going to be decided by people who don't currently reflect the majority population in Canada. I'm not naive, but would anyone describe that as being fair?
Describe what specifically? Sorry, I was reading Prairie's message.
So again, just we have a board that is supposed to reflect on race relations in Canada, and
Oh, the fact that there's no white people in there?
Yeah, there's no white people on the board, and that they have no voice.
I mean, but I mean, like, what is fair? Like, Canada isn't, it's not even a country anymore. There's no justice. There's no rule of law. I don't like this whole equity thing is the opposite of fair. Socialism is the opposite of fair. It's theft. So no, I don't believe it's fair.
No, yeah, I know it's kind of begging the question.
Oh, wait, we got an answer from the audience. Not fair.
Well, that's good to know that the audience is in agreement.
The next question I have, and we're gonna move on because I hate Arif Virani with such a passion that I can't deal with it. I don't want to talk about that guy. Anti-hate. Tell me, what is anti-hate, Like literally, what is it? Is it a corporation? Is it a
It's
nonprofit?
a
Is it
it's a
an
yeah, it's a
NGO?
nonprofit. It's a nonprofit, and it was started by Bernie Farber. So again, going back, Bernie Farber, he's a former CEO at the Canadian Jewish Congress before it got absorbed to becoming the CIJA. So Bernie Farber, he's a guy that set up a charity group that works in tandem with the RCMP, Liberal Party, with CBC, with the mainstream outlets to go after what they describe as racist, bigots, anti-Semites. Again, they're modeled after the SPLC in the states. They
Southern
are,
Law,
yeah,
Southern Law Poverty Center.
Southern Poverty Law Center, right, which
Right.
was started again by two other Jewish guys who are both pro-Zionist. So the question is like, well, so this group gets to operate in Canada. It's started by a guy who is a pro-Zionist lobbyist, uh, and it's going after Canadians. Now, I know you were gonna the question you were gonna ask was about how it ties to the Codes 4, right?
Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Well, here's the thing, right? With how should I describe it? I do not support Diagolon. I do not support what happens is in Canada, right? We've already talked about it. We don't live in a fair system. Um, you have people, you have groups who are dissidents, and what often happens, and again, this actually happened. You had informers within the group who were leaking information to the RCMP about, hey, the guys are going to meet up at the border, they're going to have guns, etc. All I have to say is, and I can't say this enough, do not join groups that talk about gatherings with guns. I cannot state that enough. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that. But I do believe that anti-hate again operates within Canada to work with groups that are not not just like you could say, well, they're I know a lot of people might say, well, they're anti-white, they're anti this, they're also anti pro-Palestinian action. Okay, Bernie Farber and those guys make sure that people who are racist against Palestinians uh, do not get called out on, and that's going to be, well, they can complain about Ezra Levant and Rebel News, but they'll never go after the fact that Rebel News and Ezra Levant are receiving foreign money to lobby on behalf of a foreign country. It's not
Uh,
Canada.
let's go back to my question. When I asked what is anti-hate, it is it's a information laundering operation of the federal government. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's, you could definitely describe it as that.
So if let's go with the Palestinian example. If I want to get the RCMP to get a warrant to go investigate 4 Palestinian students for suspected terrorism, they want to blow up CN Tower. There's no evidence. I just leak some evidence to anti-hate, and when they release it, I go to the RCMP and I say, "Oh, look, independent evidence."
Exactly. Yes.
And when else in 2016 did that happen? Do you catch my
2016.
drift? Hillary
Um.
Clinton, Fusion GPS. I
Oh
believe it was the
yes.
Rolling Stones and the FBI, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
information laundering of lies, I guess.
Or in I would love to use the example in like the UK. You have the group Hope Not Hate, which is our version. Well, it's their anti-hate and Hope Not Hate basically operate on a similar level where they work with again, it's information laundering, right? Where they go to, in Canada it's CBC, in the UK it's BBC. Where, I mean, again, right now anti-hate is being run by a former CBC executive.
I hate the
uh,
CBC.
we all do, and I know probably a lot of people in your audience would say, well, we need to shut down CBC. I disagree. I think we need to reform and take over CBC. I think that, again, CBC has a lot of issues, but I believe at least that, okay, are independent news outlets. And when we say independent news outlets, okay, I know people in the audience might think, uh, Rebel News, True North, they're basically bought and paid for by, again, foreign lobbyists, right? In the example of Rebel News, you have Ezra Levant, who receives money from Robert Shillman, right? And True North, I'm trying to remember her name, but again, the woman who started True North, her husband runs Shopify, and he's a, well, Persian Jewish Zionist.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I knew the Iranians would do something wrong eventually.
no, but again, he's not an actual, or he's not Persian. He is an Iranian Jew who again came over here, and it's it's very similar to the family that built West Edmonton Mall. They also built Mall of America. Very interesting, right? Again, it's these diaspora communities, but there, when it comes to the Jewish community, you have a lot of different diaspora groups. You have you have people whose family came over from the Soviet Union, from North Africa, from Iran post revolution, and you see this reflected in certain pet issues, right? Where you have a lot of these people that come over here and they want desperately more than anything to see the Shah installed back in Iran, and that's why you have this strong pro monarchist voice in Canada. And I know you're going to tell me that there's a lot of you know, Persians who also would agree with that. And I'd say, well, whose interest is that for, guys? Really? I mean, like, the Shah Riza is like, again, the prince is going to Israel and he's putting his hand on the wall. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't think he's exactly an independent actor.
Um, I had a. I want to go back to what you said about Diagolon. What is Diagolon? I just like they're not even on my radar. I can't be bothered to Google them. Can you just give me the cliff notes?
They are a group. Jeremy McKenzie's the founder of them, and the problem with groups like Diagolon is that uh, again, they do not think that there is a democratic outcome that can work in our favor, and they associate with people who are pagans, Wignats, people who would, you'd see on the front cover for anti-hate who are described as being Nazis. And the only reason why I'm using that is because the guys who, not Jeremy McKenzie per se, but these guys do not believe in optics, and they do a lot of stupid shit. They believe in like active club, and they associate with guys who, when they want to do group meetups with different groups, the problem always becomes you're going to get people who are infiltrators, and that's all I'll say.
Okay, yeah, let's leave that then. I don't want your body to wash up in the middle of a harbor somewhere.
Not even that. I just, like, these guys are mostly online. They're largely online, and they haven't done anything. Okay, right? It's the most active thing that people have been able to accomplish is, everyone talks about the trucker protest, how that was shut down, but you have voices from that, and you have BJ Dechter, right, who is a gay Jewish Zionist, right? He was one of the leaders of that. Um, and Daglon's not associated with them, obviously, but it seems that a lot of the people who want to go out into the streets are usually the people who have the dumbest takes on how to change the country, or have the narrowest understanding of how we operate and how we can change it in a more better democratic means. Okay, right? They don't believe in going out and voting. They don't want to participate. They just want to rummage in the streets and do horrible, jokes.
All right, we'll leave it there. I'm going over the questions. So many of these we already answered. What about this one? What is the purpose of land acknowledgements?
Uh, Land acknowledgments. I believe it's a mental exercise in submission, for one. it's a form of humiliation. Really, it's a I think I've said enough, right? It's this form of decolonization where they want everyone to acknowledge whoever group previously or currently lives here, right? It's stupid. I anything else on that, or
No, I liked where you ended it. It's stupid.
yeah,
I
it's
never,
yeah.
I didn't ask you this, but what is your view? What is the Anglo's view on decolonization, or this argument that Canada is, we have the sin of colonization?
I mean, sure, we're a colonial settler state, right? But if you were gonna phrase it in another way, right? It's like, okay, we are a settler state. We want to decolonize, and we talk about, well, we want native empowerment, right? And I know you have like a couple other questions to this about Canada relations, like with First Nations, but in Canada we got like 900,000 First Nations, not including Métis, right? And the Métis thing is slightly more interesting, right? Um, we are taking in the equivalent of the entire native population every 2 years. Okay, is that colonization? Apparently not. That's not that's not the issue. And this is my whole. This is one of the problems I got with like the First Nations activists. Well, I shouldn't even say activists, but uh, organized leadership. Right? They again, they're anti-colonial. They're against Canada as a settler state. They want to decolonize, right? But they're pro-mass migration to a large extent. I mean, there are First Nations people who are, again, not to paint them all with a black brush, but like at least not, there is no organized opposition to the fact that you are encouraging, again, mass migration and settlement into Canada. They're just happy that it's people that some of them are just happy that it's people that aren't white for all that matter. Again, I don't view it as being sustainable. And then this is where it comes into the more interesting discourse where in Canada, right, we have First Nations, but we also have Métis, right? And this again, it all comes down to issues of identity and who gets to speak on behalf of the groups or groups, right? Do Métis have the right to speak on behalf of First Nations groups? And if you just look at discourses that aren't normally covered, right, this is a major contentious issue. And again, when it comes to issues of Métis, well, you have groups that had their status taken away as Métis, and they became Canadian. Okay, they spent decades fighting for the right to call themselves Métis again and to be recognized as Métis. And then they turn around and say, "Well, that group over there, they aren't Métis. They are not. They don't have the right to do that." I am not delving into that, but I acknowledge that there are discourses in those communities that should be left to themselves. And I think it's important that non-Métis, non-First Nations Canadians have the right to define themselves, get to define how they want to take their country in a certain position forward, right? We are not just supplicants on our knees begging for forgiveness because, okay, we built Canada. We built Canada. Okay, I am tired of having to say otherwise, right? We're again, Canada Race Relations Foundation, the Canadian government say, well, Chinese in BC and parts of the West built the railway, so they have a right to be here. Okay, that's their claim to Canadian status. Okay, you built the rest of Canada. You're an illegitimate settler. This
I see
is
your point. Yeah.
it's very tiresome, and it's more horrific due to the fact that we have a lot of elected officials who believe this wholeheartedly, and it's beyond retarded too because it's like you want to encourage multiculturals, and again with the whole Arif thing, and can like I know one of your questions that you asked me ahead was like, well, how do we get to view ourselves as Anglo this or bicultural that? Well, do you see anyone talking positively about Anglo-Canadians? It's never
You
brought
can't
up.
even you can't use the word Anglo the same way you can't use the word nationalism. That people start you see images of like swastikas flashing in their eyes.
Well, yeah, or like more they'll say, well, what about residential schools? This
Oh
is
yeah, it's like a knee jerk reaction, but you're not dealing with rational people. You're dealing with like automatons that they're almost programmed to respond in a certain way.
it's even worse though on the conservative side because they do not want to. They'll just say, "Well, why can't you just be a Canadian Canadian?" It's like, okay, what language do we speak? Who are the settlers here? Who actually like? And I find them to be just cowards. Okay,
Have
you won't
you?
even yeah.
I don't know how old you are, and you don't have to tell me, but have you read the? It's very easy read. Bilingualism and biculturalism. Is it an inquiry commission report?
No, I have not.
1961, and it's the only document from the government of Canada I've read that I'm proud of because it has the word inalienable in there. But the reason I bring it up, like they specifically, they mentioned that we have two cultures in Canada. We have two languages. Like back then, they were very proud of the Canadian culture. It's you don't get that anymore.
No, you don't. And you've had multiple gener. I do believe that the leadership of Canada gets to control and define what Canada is, and this is why I think that we have to focus on attaining representation and then power. And I say that because without it, you're going to have people who despise us, write us out in the most horrific ways. And I just want to add in, right? It's so stupid, right? When it comes to like, the whole, well, we can't have a country because residential schools, right? And residential schools were a form of genocide, and they lead up to other genocides, right? You know how I know a lot of that is sanctimonious BS, right? Because in Canada, right, our residential schools kept on going till the 90s as they love to inform us, okay, right? Uh, and they use the term cultural genocide this. Okay. Have you ever heard of a single official that, ran one of these schools being charged with genocide or any push to charge him with genocide?
Well, no, but that's because of government view. If they do something wrong, it's our fault as citizens. We pay for it.
Exactly. It's not the fault of the government in question, right? It's or the people that are receiving pensions because of the work, right? It's a collective um, sin, right? And we right. This is again work tying us back to earlier with the CIJA, right? When I was comparing the fact that they support the BC Anti-Racism Act while they're opposing recognizing Palestinian anti-racism. CIJA fully backs Truth and Reconciliation Day, right, where they recognize the tragedies and horrors of the residential school system, right? They will use that as a means to say, "Oh, wow, we know." Like this is on their website. They say, "Well, we share such similar tragedies, and we'd like to talk and form a committee on dealing with this tragedy and like the burden that this community is impacted with." It's like, okay, but at the same time, you have CIJA works with Simon Wiesenthal Center, right? And they will heavily control the ability of First Nations groups to say, "Well, we want to show solidarity with Palestinians." Absolutely no, no, that's not allowed to happen, right? And you and me talked previously that again in Canada, the First Nations leadership is not allowed to be anything but explicitly pro-Israel. Right? They can say Canada is a racist colonial settler state. It has to be dismantled. We have to be pro-Indigenous, but you can't show solidarity with Palestinians. And the people who have done so have lost their jobs and have been blacklisted. So even the Indigenous lobby in Canada, right, the one that we're all supposed to be so in tune of, right, we're supposed to like give all credence to, even they aren't allowed to have like the final say on certain issues.
Anglo, I agree with that. So I understand what you're saying, that the Civil War thing, like they're it's a battle on that battlefield. Another thing I'm noticing is the messaging from these principally political parties is getting so sophisticated that it's no longer messaging or marketing. It's like military grade propaganda. Um, like, to give you an example, uh, like the NDP says, like they have to pay their fair share. The Liberal Party says we're just trying to level the playing field. Like, they say these things that they don't have any meaning, but they kind of resonate with the voter, and they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess we want a level playing field. And it's very difficult for ordinary citizens like you or me. Well, maybe you're clever, but for me and average people, it's very difficult to counter that in the moment. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the idea of Canadians being nice, right? This image that we've been fostering. It's contradictory too, because they say, well, Canada is so generous, and we're such a good, kind, conservative people. At the same time, they say, well, we're actually this racist, evil people who have to atone for their past. It's frustrating because you have people who believe in that narrative, and I can't tell you about the number of pointless circular conversations I've had where whatever policy we have, it goes back to we're nice people, but we're also atoning for sins.
We're nice racists.
We're nice racists, and again, you even just said like the political like again this military propaganda, like this kind of sinks in, right? And it just reminded me that again, just a couple days ago, right? PP, right, announced, and this is again the head of the Conservative Party said another 6 beautiful souls taken hostage on October 7th by Hamas, genocidal death cult, were murdered while in captivity. May their memories be a blessing. They are the same evil terrorists that killed 7 Canadians and continue to be supported by the tyrants in Tehran. Hamas must surrender and release all the remaining hostages. This is straight out of the Israeli foreign ministry, right? Especially the "May their memories be a blessing." That is like, okay, okay, PP, you may as well be saying that from a synagogue, okay? Um, and talking again about like, okay, this is being supported by the tyrants in Tehran, which ties in with our foreign ministry and our foreign affairs. Now, our foreign minister, Melanie Jolie, right? Uh, I was in a conversation with someone else recently, and when it comes to our right, and I did want to just tie this back into how Canadians might not be fully aware of how captured we are, right? And we present ourselves as being neutral in certain foreign diplomatic situations, okay, right? Our foreign affairs, right? They come out and they say, well, we condemn the fact that 6 hostages were killed, and we also condemn Israel, like for occasionally airstriking parts of the Gaza Strip, right? Our foreign minister meets up with Mr. Shimon Fogel, and she meets up with CIJA, and she meets up with Erwin Kotler, right? This is all prior to October 7th. This is years before, right? And she's promising this group how they're going to combat anti Semitism in Canada. Okay. I almost know for certain that there's not at the same time Palestinians having private meetings with our foreign minister to discuss issues impacting them. Right. Okay. So our domestic affairs, our foreign affairs are fully captured. All right. You cannot expect any neutral takes from this. And the sooner people realize that we aren't governing ourselves, I hope that they realize that, do you really want to vote for the conservatives who are using Israeli foreign affairs like messaging to describe the Canadian take, or even the liberals, right? And I got to say, I'm hopeful. Well, maybe not even hopeful, but I'm at least not aware of a similar presence in the PPC. And I want to ask, well, How can we ensure that PPC doesn't get taken over by a foreign lobby?
Is that question for me?
Sure, I want to ask you that.
I guess it was more for the audience, but I've been thinking about this too. So one thing that many of us in the PPC want, and everybody is beating us over the head with, is this constitution. So they say, Max is a dictator until you get a constitution. And then the question is, how do you structure the constitution so someone like Warren Kinsella or the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, doesn't just flood members and take it over?
Warren
Sort
Kinsella
of
is
this
also a major like Zionist shill, by the way, also,
doesn't
which is
doesn't surprise me.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
what I was gonna say is another thing that's often a criticism that's made of the People's Party is that our fundraising is low. We make less money than the Conservative Party. Yes, with less money, there's a little less you can do, but you're less beholden to these big donors. And this is the one thing that no one realizes. The People's Party has a massive war chest. It raises a lot of funds. It's just that those funds are sometimes in terms of volunteer hours. Like we have a lot of candidates and a lot of EDA CEOs and a lot of citizens that are volunteering their time, and it's very difficult for lobbyists to infiltrate that. But it is something that worries me that, assuming we get a couple of seats and maybe in the next 10 years, you build something beautiful with the People's Party. And then in 15 years, it's a part of the swamp.
I like the idea of having a strong activist base that should be informed on issues. And again, like something like maybe not a pledge, but a an awareness that, well, or a collective awareness of not allowing groups that we know to have previously tried infiltrating other parties to, well, again, I'm just going to say it. There's like the Zionist lobby have in the past done very successful, not even just in Canada, but across the world, right, in infiltrating dissident right wing movements and trying to bring them over onto their perspective, right? And that's why you have perfect example. This is Ezra Levant, right, or True North News, and what I'm more well, and then the other one, which is the Hub, right? And maybe people are familiar with ideally two or more of those groups. Uh, you have people that are professors of law and lawyers who are silent on issues that they know would be impacting us. And I'd like to know, is there a way of having PPC members who are familiar with the law at least chart out a means to challenge foreign law? Because this is my problem, right? I see foreign lobbying groups operating so openly and brazenly in Canada that nobody would challenge them, and or at least demand that the courts challenge them. And I'd like to see at least a promise that they will make a specific effort to combat these foreign lobbies, because I feel like if these lobbies can be challenged, it would reduce some of the pressure on us. Again, these new laws that are coming up against online hate speech laws in general, right? BC, it's all being backed by foreign lobbies. So can PBC be the spearhead to challenging this?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I can't speak for the party, but I I could escalate that to HQ and say this is something we should pick up. The problem I have, and it goes back to the question I think I asked you, like, what is a lobbyist? If the public doesn't understand the problem, they're not going to care. So if you're looking at the urban centers, they care about going to a bar, picking up a girl, having an expensive dinner. Whether or not Israel lobby is doing something in Canada, like we would have to do an education campaign and explain to them why should a Canadian even care about foreign interference. Like these are terms that if we had like a functioning education system, people would understand that. But now I got to go in and I got to train like 20, 30, 40-year-old people on why you can't have foreign interference.
I would happily volunteer to do any class talking about this. And again, if we had a handful of people who were in the legal profession, working out this, right? Stamping this out. And this is the beauty of this, or I do see this working out that you could even draw people who lean towards the left, people who might not even, who would be at least strategic enough to see that, okay, well, both parties are captured. Maybe a third party would do the justice that we need, right? I'm just saying, right? If you had people say, well, okay, they're going to challenge CIJA's status away that, well, and I know we didn't get to talk about this, but Canada's JNF lost their charity status. And to just go back to the start, right? You have CIJA challenging or acting on, right, with their various appendages, going after the Canadian government or the CRA for making them lose their charity status. And I think this is a great idea, right? What can PPC get behind this, right? Because it would be great at least for left-wing people, left-leaning people, pro-Palestinian people to know that there's at least one party that is not going to allow itself to be captured by a group, a lobby that will be hostile both towards Canadians and to people outside of Canada.
I'm thinking about that. So after this episode, obviously, this happens a lot where my guests say profound things, and it takes me a few days or weeks to digest it. I'll see if I can do that. Right now, we have sort of like a watered down way of doing that, where we say, Canada first. We should not be spending money on wars. But you're saying it should be more than just wars. It's almost like foreign interference is an attack on the nation.
Exactly. This is exactly the problem, right? Saying that we want to hands off this, it's not enough. It's not doing enough, right? We have to step up. We have to recognize that, well, the people that we are, who would be against us, are well organized. They have people in the legal, we have people who are the heads of law departments at universities and major law firms. They're acting as effectively foreign lobbyists, and this needs to be challenged. And I would love to see a party do this, and I think PPC is the only one that is capable of doing this. And I will do whatever it takes. I will get whoever I know who might be of any help to do this, because we cannot allow another election cycle to have what's going to happen, right? During the next elections, the conservatives are going to win, and is this foreign lobby going to lose any power or gain more power? I think it's the later, right? When they get in, the first thing you're going to see under the conservatives is they're going to use new hate speech laws that are being backed by conservative lawyers like Michael Geist, University of Ottawa professor, right, who's backing the online hate bill, right, because he says, well, it doesn't go far enough when it's targeting my community. Well, why is he saying that? Because you are having left-wing pro-Palestinian people organize online and in colleges, and he's saying, well, we need to update it so that we can go after these people more. Okay, what he should be registered as a foreign law. He should not be working at the university, and frankly, if he should be asked to leave. And I mean that as in, okay, you align more with a foreign country, you can go there. And I should not have to be afraid of losing a bank account or or worse, be arrested for saying that. I can't. If most of what I've said today would get me in so much trouble if my identity was known, and this is the problem. We are not a free country, and these people don't want to allow us to be a free country. I want to challenge that, and I will do whatever it takes.
I'm laughing at Arnold Haino. He's a friend of mine, and he's a PPC candidate out east. And he recommended Leighton Gray. He said Leighton Gray would be perfect for taking on this endeavor you recommended. He's a lawyer, by
Eh,
the way, out of Alberta.
okay, okay, this is good. This is good. If there are people in the audience, yeah, please reach out to me. I, I, I like to see people that are concerned about Canada and are willing to actually address these issues, right? Because CPC is not going to do it.
It's funny. You're I will follow up with you, and I think you're right. There's something there that we have to be the tip of the spear on this, opposing lobbyists through the PPC. But one of my questions is, do you think that the PPC, the People's Party, is in any way captured? But I guess considering we're having this conversation, you feel that it's probably the least captured.
Yes, I think you're doing a great job of like disproving the idea that that you are running you are running for federal office, and there are other people maybe like you that are willing to hear this open. But I have yet to see an example of anyone in the CPC calling this out. In fact, hilariously enough, right when it again talking about foreign lobbies, right? You and me talked in private. You have Erwin Kotler's Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. So Erwin Kotler, our former Attorney General, who says he likes to boast that he's the former attorney for Nelson Mandela and Natan Sharansky, who was like one of these refusnik Zionists from the Soviet Union, right? He has as honorary patrons and like top members of his group, including Pearl Elidas from University of, I think it's McGill, people who are both left-wing Zionists, right-wing Zionists, right? But also you have Michael Ignatieff, and you have Thomas Mulcair, right? You have again major Canadian politicians who are aligned with what is effectively a foreign lobby group, right? And that's not a problem to anyone. And nobody from the both parties would like even the NDP guys would be hesitant to hear what I have to say. So, I mean, yeah, good luck with that anyway. So, um, yeah.
What's your
Sorry
view
if
on
I was.
the? No, it's fine. What's your view on the NDP party? Because for the People's Party to succeed, we do need to get disenfranchised NDP voters. And like, what was the appeal of Jack Layton? And what's the vision of or what was it before Jagmeet Singh ran it into the ground?
Uh, I think it's care. I think a lot of the people on the left, they're strongly empathetic, right? They're compassionate to the human condition. And while I can say that there's a lot of misguidance on that, I think it's good. I think it's good that people like their concern is, well, how can we get Canadians dental care or improve public health care or education, right? And I think they care about things being fair. They have a lot of so one of the things that I think is the most unfair about, and they talk a lot about systems. The thing is, the difference between the left and at least the CPC, the mainstream conservatives, is the left believe in systems. They don't reject systems. You don't find anarchists in power on the left, okay? Because that's retarded. Anarchism doesn't work, right? And the CPC guys, libertarians, they want to be a form of anarchists, right? It doesn't work. It never has. Um, and when it comes to the most unfair system, I believe that free trade is one of the most unfair systems because it disincentivizes people from investing in our country. And people on the left recognize that foreign money buys influence in our country and it buys power within our country. And if we had a system in place that built up capital.
Oh no, I've never been in a position where I'm the only one streaming. I think we lost Anglo. Let's see what the audience is saying. Canada's big issue is Supreme Court is bought, and Canada per se does not have a constitution like the states. I agree with that, but I'm pretty sure per se is written se, not say. It's Latin. One of the benefits of going doing research. Yeah, we lost him. Let me. I wonder if he knows that we lost him. Is he just rambling on? Uh, oh, I think he's back.
Um,
Hey,
what
welcome
can you
back.
hear? All right. Yeah, just free trade is against the national interests of the country. We need to, again, incentivize capital and industry back into Canada, provide good paying manufacturing jobs, oppose free trade policies, right? Because this is something that the, again, if you're a left wing person, why are you allowing foreign capital to dominate Canada? Why, again, great example of this is like these certain mining syndicates that back, well, perfect example. You have, I'm trying to remember his name, but you have the Hub. Now, the Hub is basically bought and paid for by the Monk Society, right? The I'm trying to remember his name, but the guy who the Monk debates.
Oh yeah, those debates in Toronto where they bring in conservatives and then shout them down.
Exactly, but that's basically all a front, right? It's all a front by Barrick Gold, and it's run by pro-Zionist outfits. These guys are able to operate and have controlled discourses, right? And if you're a leftist, right, you should know that, okay, well, foreign right wing capital is trying to control Canadian discourse. Okay, you need to know that, right? And some of them are much more aware, even the ones I vehemently disagree with on a lot of topics, but they might not be familiar to the full extent of this. And yeah, I like to see regulations in place. I'd like to see, and this is why I'm the person that does not oppose shutting down CBC. I think CBC needs to be seriously organized. I think its leadership needs to be removed, but I don't want to take away uh, an institution that allows access of information across the country. And again, I think that you can probably do better by telling people that you want to reform, not replace or destroy major institutions. People like unions. They like having solid social safety nets. I don't think the libertarian thing. I don't know how much of a libertarian you might identify with, but it it's not going anywhere. I don't know. You want to respond?
No, I'll get you on. We'll do a debate between you and one of the libertarians.
Oh, great.
Yeah, yeah. That'll no, it's
Yeah.
fine. Usually, when you do debates, people are polite. Um,
No, it's
I,
I didn't think
I
we
don't want
had that
to.
many.
Oh, there are some. There's pockets. I interviewed the New Brunswick Libertarian Party, two candidates from there. You got pockets here and there, but I wanted to pick up on something you said. You disagree with free trade. I had a guest on, Susan Stanfield, and she said that, like, in her mind, ever since the '80s and NAFTA, corporations have been coming into Canada and hijacking our system of governance and replacing it with what she called the Washington D.C. model, just corrupt model. Like, would you characterize what the U.S. is doing through NAFTA as another form of foreign interference?
Yes, but I wouldn't address it like when we say the U.S. I'd say free trade interests in the U.S. have successfully infiltrated Canada. Now we are a country that historically, as part of a British colony, the Tories in Canada believed in free trade. But free trade is not the recipe for national success, right? I believe in a form of Hamiltonianism where we need to distance ourselves from capital interests and towards people interests, manufacturing interests. This is what builds a country up.
So you're federalist. Is that accurate?
Yes, I identify strongly as a federalist. I am the furthest thing away from being a libertarian, free trade capitalist, right? And that means that I want to see manufacturing brought back to Canada. I want to see industry stay in Canada. Okay, I don't buy into this whole like, well, if we just remove like tariffs and we encourage free trade, that it's going to be all well and good. Can someone show me where that's a strong example of that?
I can't off the top of my head give an example, but I don't want to inject myself too much into this, but I've talk to libertarians, and it seems like it can work maybe within the nation, but once you get to the border, you almost need like an authoritarian communist. You switch over your views when it comes to immigration. You're like, no, 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 we can't be libertarian, because I just don't understand how, unless you completely get rid of the welfare state, and then maybe you could just say, hey, anybody wants to come in, we're just a region, we're the autonomous region.
Precisely, right? And this idea that it's like you know uh, a frenzy zone for like foreign capital. It's like they love Canada for that sake. That's like one of the problems we've had with housing, of course, right? Where you've had foreign buyers buy up huge sections of like urban like development, like for apartments in Vancouver, Toronto, and can libertarians like justify that? No, I don't think so. Housing is tied with that building, and again, our constructive industry, our construction industry, our housing industry is so there's a disgust.
And we lost them again. Oh, back. Welcome back.
Hey, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, you were talking about housing industry.
Oh yeah, so we had on one of Joe's spaces, you had this Iranian woman, and she was a Zoroastrian, and that was like aside the point, but that was like really funny because she was in development, right, for housing, right, for well, for building up zones, and she's moved to the U.S. But what was interesting is that she was making while the conversation was about cultural issues, about Muslims and migrants, right? She said, "Well, you Canadians, right? You're so stupid, right?" And she was actually a nice lady, and we got along later, right after. But she made it a point that it's like, well, you guys, you don't care, and you've allowed foreign cap, like you've allowed and I'm using her words, you've allowed Jews to take over like your development sector. It's like she's got a point, right? When you have people who again with capital who have foreign interests who they can dominate certain sectors of the economy and then they can use the excess profits to buy politicians, influence foreign policy, give large donations to schools that create the foreign policy. So like if you look at all the major schools in Canada for foreign policy, the Max Planck or I'm trying to remember some of the other ones, right? um, but this is all bought and paid for by free traders.
Yeah, but I don't look at it as, well, I guess it is free trade, but I look at it as like nationalism versus globalism or post nationalism, where you just like open the floodgates, and it, it's like you have an ecosystem. Every country is like it used to be an insulated ecosystem, and then they just punctured and perforated the borders, and now all hell is breaking loose because the richer countries are influencing the poor countries, or in our case, we're being relegated to a poor country status because the more powerful countries are like, we're just going to use you as a natural resource pool.
I don't like the idea of Canada just being a land of hewing wood and mining up copper. I'd like there to be a better future for the country, and I cannot see. I don't think you find many people who would like come out here and say that actually globalism is great for Canada, in terms of our development. But yeah,
Well, I have a theory for that too. I grew up in Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver for 4 years downtown, and like it is a massive voter area. Like these basically Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, they determine the direction that the country goes in. And every time they bring in immigrants, they pack them into these cities. And when you're in a city, globalism seems like the right thing. Like you're a lawyer, you're working your ass off, you're living for yourself, you don't have any kids, maybe you have a dog, you just go into the bar every night. Whether or not Canada, gets taken over, turned into like a resource generating region, it doesn't impact you. Like you don't care. You're not invested in your country. I don't know how else to explain it.
no, you're totally right. And part of that has been like a dissolving of national identity. on purpose, or it's like the national identity. It does not concern itself with these like issues. And again, this is a problem with our media. This is a problem with currently the opposition party, where they have basically vacated the conversation and said, well, we're actually pro-globalist. PB is like saying that he wants more people coming in. He's more like, again, he's fine with foreign business owners coming up here, opening up shop and saying, well, we need to import our laborers. Well, again, that's the leader of the Conservative Party there for you. That's the Tories for you. So I
I
don't think they can.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're going. This is we started out super structured. Now it's a fluid conversation, but the Conservative Party, basically, Pierre Poilievre, he's a smart guy, and his strategy is, well, Trudeau is shooting himself in the foot, and I'm just going up in the polls. So how about I just keep my mouth shut? So he's not really saying anything. Um, it helps him, but I don't think it's helping the country.
No, it's very much like Kamala Harris right now, where there's a bit of an irony to that, where you know, he doesn't have to say much in order to come in because the tide has turned against Justin Trudeau, and it's unfortunate because he's going to be winning certain ridings only because the ridings are made up of people who were identified as liberal for years until for October 7th. That's why Anthony Housefather is looking to like lose his seat. That's why you have certain ridings in Toronto and Vancouver that are going to switch over to the Conservative Party, right? What would have been thought as unimaginable before all changed thanks to post October 7th. And I will say there was an intriguing article, right? And it was done by a leftist, right? It was saying how like a lot of and liberal journalists, right, have been criticizing Trudeau and the party on their stance on this. And you have like Deborah Lyons, like our anti-Semitism ambassador, right, saying, well, the problem that we have now in Canada is a demographic one. Warren Kinsella is basically also echoing this, where the Liberal Party has the people in it who are saying, well, now we have a demographic problem. We've had a demographic problem ever since October 7th, and you've had masses of people demonstrating on the streets and urban ridings, demanding like free Palestine, etc. So for those people, losing an election might be an advantage, right? Because they'll still be in power. It lets them reset the party, while the conservatives and the Zionists who take over there will have cemented a lot of the positions that they want to say out loud, but they can't, right? Anthony Housefather from Montreal and these other guys, they are definitely concerned about mass migration of people from Muslim countries. And I'll give a great example of that is that right now the main issue that them and CIJ is talking about is refugees from Gaza. Now, previously, they've all been very much pro bringing in refugees and settling them in urban ridings, right? Like you said, the whole refugee policy has been a boon to the Liberal Party, right? They love it because the people that they bring in, they can say, "Look, we're increasing diversity." That's a plus to them, right? They're bringing in diversity. They're bringing in people that they know will vote for them. But now the people that they've brought in might be hostile to one of their core tenets, right? For Trudeau, Mr. Zionism is not a dirty word. You can't really square those two things.
It reminds me of the U.S. where they opened the border, and it's an invasion. That's literally an invasion over there. But they don't want people from Cuba and I believe Venezuela because they realize communism doesn't work, so they don't vote Democrat.
Not really. I mean, like there have been like they've had plenty of people come over from. In fact, Cuba is one of the few countries where you still can come in illegally and you'll be recognized. You won't be sent back. And similar with Venezuela, where you have people coming in, they say, well, this is a consequence of socialist policies. And they like actually having people come in from Venezuela because it boosts their ideology, even though like uh, the sanctions on the sanctions on Venezuela did have a massive impact on food production, which caused the humanitarian crisis of people to leave Venezuela for nearby uh, Colombia and then northward bound. And again, this is a problem of the U.S. deep state and people who wanted to overthrow the Maduro regime. And while that, you can say, well, it's a communist regime, what they want to see overthrown so they can access the oil. The consequences of that means that they are willing to allow mass influx of people to enter their borders to achieve that end. So, likewise, if Canada decided that we were going to, again, and this is what I fear, right? Where PP has said this again when he's talking about the tyrants in Tehran, where if Trump gets in, and I know a lot of people probably in PBC and CBC want to see a renewed Trump presidency, but the fear is like again, if there's a conflict with Iran, it could tear apart not just Iran but the entire region apart, and we will have a humanitarian crisis that makes the previous like Iraq invasion and occupation of Afghanistan seem like much more insignificant than what we'd face in the event of potentially World War III, which is another thing that we have to factor in. So yeah, I don't believe that our foreign policy should evolve around overthrowing governments, and I also don't believe that take. I don't agree with the left that if you overthrow countries, you have to take the people in. I even see like the same thing that happened after 2014 when you had the neocons orchestrate a coup in Ukraine, and now 10 years
Can
on,
I
we're
can I
dealing with
interrupt you
yeah,
there?
yeah,
Remember earlier I said that their messaging is approaching like military grade psyops sort of
yeah,
propaganda. Here's a perfect one where like they take something very simple. They say, well, we started this war, so we have to take them in. And then
yeah.
you're kind of on the defensive. You're like, I don't want to be a racist, but that kind of makes sense. But it's if you don't have on our side, on the opposite side, an opposing argument to shut that down immediately, it's going to spread like wildfire.
Well, a lot of the people who say that are very naive themselves, and I mean, let's be real. A lot of the time, it's women who say that, who like they have like the maternal instincts come in, right? But they get all confused in the head. They're saying, "Well, we started this war, so we have to take them in." No, no, we do not actually. And this has been the problem with Afghanistan and whatnot. We took in these people. We Canada took in people from Afghanistan. We paid to like prop up a government and a military there along with the U.S. And the moment we were pulling out, like the Afghan government basically collapsed, the Afghan army collapsed. They let the Taliban roll in, and now, you have all these people that we were supporting for years saying "mea culpa," and there's a whole industry there of people to bring in these people, advocate for them, who also happen to be Zionists. That's a separate issue. But the left wing people who say we have to do that, they are incredibly naive, and well, at the same time, they don't even believe that we live in a legitimate country. They think we're a settler state, but they're okay with bringing in people and settling them in the country. So I don't really, cater to that kind of ideology, but I agree that it is again, you're not seeing the same people who see what's happening in Ukraine. Like, okay, neocons in the West, basically, they did basically orchestrate the coup in Ukraine. They basically facilitated the takeover by Zelensky, and they basically encouraged Zelensky to say that, like, Ukraine can get missiles and strike um, Russia into its interior. And you had basically after the 2014 coup in Ukraine, you had the new government that was Western friendly, but at the same time was hostile to Russian minorities, forced the Russian like Eastern speaking provinces to do a breakaway, which evolved into the current Ukrainian situation, which resulted in us, Canada, taking in tens of thousands of Ukrainians. And now you have people who are saying, well, you took in tens of thousands of Ukrainians without problem. Why can't you do that with Sudan or the Congo or any of these other? It's like it just escalates, right? It's like, okay, we have one conflict zone and we have to take in all the people from there, or well, not all, but we have to take in tens of thousands of people from that conflict zone, and tens of thousands of people from that conflict zone, and it's musical chairs, right? And I agree that we should not be encouraging this, and it'd be nicer if our media was actually drawing attention to the fact that, well, why is it that David Frum, a Canadian who, you know, he coined he coined the phrase "axis of evil" to describe Saddam and like right, the region. He was a speechwriter for Bush. He was part of this whole neocon Zionist network that wanted the invasion of both Iraq, but they also wanted an invasion of Syria, Iran, Sudan, right? You can read about this in the Clean Break paper. They wanted that. From wanted that. So when he did that, he was acting on behalf of a foreign country. But the people on the left, they are hesitant to admit that. Uh, again, when does it factor into like our immigration policy is a direct consequence of people in power who act on the behalf of another country? That hardly ever gets brought up. Anyway.
Angle, we're at 2 hours now. Just to wrap it up, I have one question. You and I talked before, so you said you're a federalist for people that's Hamilton's kind of camp and sort of more towards a large government. But putting more specifically, like I am very much a libertarian, but I'm not running as a libertarian. That's just like almost impossible in Canada. On the other hand, you have someone like Trudeau. Let's just put Trudeau as a 100% government point. Maybe it's not 100%, but like you got Trudeau on one side, big government. You have libertarians on the other side, and I guess somewhere in the middle you have classically liberal, kind of what Canada was before 74, where they said that we had a mixed economy and a central bank, state sovereign bank. Where do you think the People's Party should land in that spectrum?
Um, that's an interesting way. If you're gonna, I would not like to see. Hmm, I I don't believe in like the phrase. Well, when it comes to classical liberalism, I see a lot of tropes with that or not tropes, traps that I rather not get stuck in. I do believe in like some of the ideas of like English liberties, but I don't believe in free trade. I believe in, again, a good central bank is necessary for regulating our currencies. I don't believe that, again, under Trudeau, he's acting as a federalist who's a protectionist. I see the opposite of that. So I believe that we can do more with what we have and we can improve on it. And I just really rather not like see Trudeau as like the ultimate example of a federalist. And I would challenge people on that.
Yeah, let me take that back. I shouldn't have even mentioned that. Federalist just like that means that there is a federal government. It doesn't mean the federal government taxes you to death. Oh.
Yeah, the whole conversation about taxation, I think, is like it's redundant too because no matter how much we're taxing our people, we're not getting the returns that we need. We need a better way of generating capital for projects. We need tariffs. We need better protections. We need to encourage industry. Yeah, that's my views.
What about I know I said we'd end the episode, but what about these like I hate all this waste in government. Like these commissions, like the Human Rights Tribunal, Workers' Compensations Appeals Tribunal, the College of Physicians, the Law Society. Like these are you're taking the judiciary and you're lumping it in with the executive. Now we got the Race Commission. Like how much of this do you think we should keep, and how much should we get rid of?
Well, it's again the College of Physicians and the Canada Race Relations Council and the Workers' Appeal. Like, I mean, again, different things. I would happily do away with the Canada Race Relations Foundation as a crown corporation. The College of Physicians different, but hilariously, I did accidentally get one of their magazines in the mail from them because of previous, and in it, in the article, they were talking about basically DEI initiatives, talking about how the importance of allyship and challenging. Um, I think right now the concern should not be to do away with these institutions, but to do away with some of the mindset that has infiltrated them. Right, that I would see as a priority of right. Talking to these people, trying them to bring them over into our side could be a better use of our time than just saying we're going to shut them down hypothetically if we take power. I would prefer that we have a means that physicians and workers who are injured have a means that is not just directly going to the government, but for groups that, again, will act in their interests, but those interests should be aligned with the country.
All right. And any
And you know
last
what?
words for?
I'm not even against the idea of having like a uh, means of having a multicultural commission for different groups, right? But that means that the and this is a really interesting thing, at least from a legal point, because and this is where it gets really dicey. But right now, in classical English systems, right, we view the lens of people as individuals, and groups we don't do because that's a form of corporatism. If we're going to have a corporatist structure where we have different groups and they're represented by official bodies, and you're really just going up against certain groups for actions of individuals, that's fine. But we need to have a regulatory body for that. I'm fine if there's like an official Jewish body, official Muslim body, and like you can have all the branches of whatever sect and ethnic group, but they need to be like regulated and held to account for those groups' actions. Okay, does that make sense?
No, it does. I thanks for the clarification. I wanted to end the episode of saying this was very valuable for me, and I'll stay in touch with you and moving forward. So I want to thank you for that. Um, I wanted to give you the final word, and if you could just, I'd like to leave people with a word of optimism. There's just so much hatred in Canada and fear. So, what do you think is going right, and what do you see in the on the horizon?
If I was going to put in a positive word, I'd say that our opponents are incompetent, they are uninspired, they are weak in a lot of ways, and that gives us an opening point, right? We can take them on. Again, I'm trying to be optimistic, but I think, again, if we can just find a better nexus to platform our ideas and convince more people who might see the weakness, and again, hopefully, if the conservatives gain in power, we can push people to the right of that. We can push the Overton window. We can get people to see that, well, okay, they're not going to do any better, and what they're basically doing, they had 10 years to do. It's same with the conservatives in the UK. Um, we just have to really hammer out their weaknesses and bring more people into the conversation. And that means not just bringing people from the right, but also people from the left. We can get them over on ideas that can actually improve Canada. I want to say that we can do better.
Fantastic. Anglo, one last thing. Where can people follow you?
Right now, I'm just on Twitter. That might change. I really been slacking, but yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Anglocolons, Colons. Um, yeah, thank you for having me. I hope to speak again soon, and I hope to talk to more people in the PPC.
Absolutely. And I will stay in touch. To anybody else in the audience, if any of you want to come on the show and talk, this is not for extraordinary people. We're all just ordinary Canadians. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to come on, send me an email, info@paymentascari.ca. Um, and Anglo, thank you very much for coming on. And I look forward to talking to you next time.
See you again.
Bye, sir.